the first question that I wanted to throw at you was about the ATS, and more specifically this legendary viral trending topic that everyone wants to talk about on LinkedIn, the ATS bot. Um, there's a lot out there. We wanted to kind of get your opinion on what is fact and what is myth.
Yeah.
What is the ATS bot, and is it real?
Yeah. I think I I think that recruiting has gotten so impersonal that for job seekers, it feels like there's no humanity to it because things
Mm-hmm.
are so automated. And so I think it's easy for people to draw conclusions or like want to find answers for why they're not moving forward, why they're not hearing back, those sorts of things. And so I think it's really perpetuated. Like people want it to be driven by like an ATS bot versus a human because that feels more like it will make sense to them, something like that. Because yeah, it's the myth that won't die. But I man, it would be amazing if we had technology that could scan a resume and assess it against a job description and just like tell us that someone is a great fit. I mean, that could be really interesting technology. I just haven't seen it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think there's just a lot of misunderstandings around the technology. An applicant tracking system, it's like a filing cabinet. It's a digital filing cabinet that you
Right.
can kind of sort through with a file for every candidate. And the closest I've seen to this idea of a bot are two things. Like one is knockout questions. So you can put certain, like yes, no type questions on an application. And then if a candidate marks no, for example, if you can only hire someone in Texas and a question is, do you live in Texas? And they say no, then it will knock them out and automatically reject them. That's a human that has set that up, and it is based on the human response that you gave. You are not qualified for that role because of your location. So I've seen that sort
Mm-hmm.
of thing, and I think that gets like people then assume, well, the whole process is like that.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing behind it is that some applicant tracking systems do have a feature that will prioritize based on things like your current job title or
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you all have seen this too, but how many key skills you have embedded, keywords, things like that. It might prioritize and put candidates with a stronger match higher up on the list.
Right.
And so there may be a prioritization element that some applicant tracking systems do. I honestly haven't even used many that have that, but I have seen it. And so I think all of that turns into this belief that humans aren't actually involved in the process and these rejections are coming from these ATS bots.
What's crazy, that's really true. What's crazy is that there are people out there in the market that are that are selling a product based on this myth, right?
Yep.
It's like it is a barrier to entry.
Yep.
You are, and it's shifting. The reason why, in my opinion, and I'm sure Andrew's going to add some to this, but in my opinion, like I think the reason why it's so attractive is because it takes the responsibility and the accountability away from the job seeker, and
Yeah.
it puts the blame on a system. And we're all
Yep.
about that. Like, not we're not going to go down the road of politics, but
Yeah.
like we're all get excited when the blame is not on us. And the job seeker who has been unemployed for 6 months can go, yes, it's not me, it's not my resume, it's not my skills, it's not my soft skills or hard skills, it's the system.
Yeah.
Screw the system. And you hit it on the nail. Like there are, the closest thing that I have seen, I've worked with about half a dozen different types of ATSs, and the only thing that I have seen close to AI, in the sense of a bot, is those deal breaker questions where it's like,
Yeah.
and I set them up all the time on like
Yeah.
ZipRecruiter and Indeed.
Mhm.
I'm like, deal breaker question, you need to have a degree. If you don't have a degree, it will send an auto reject.
Yeah.
Like that is, you know an ATS bot
Yeah.
system like thing, but I have put that in place,
Right.
and it's only rejecting you because you haven't hit the bare minimum requirement for the
Right.
job.
Yeah.
Andrew, did you want to add to that?
I think to your point, it does kind of shift focus away from these other factors, right? And so it's easy to kind of blame it on the boogeyman, so to speak. But, it's not always, I want to highlight that it's not always candidate lack of qualifications or skills that are the reason, maybe they're not hearing back. Like this market is a perfect example. I'm sure Bonnie can relate. We're getting 10 times the amount of applicants than we were getting last year. And so the reality is the job search is a numbers game. You can get really targeted. You can get really focused. That's what we teach. And that's what we try to encourage. But at the end of the day, it's a volume game. You're going up and you're competing against a lot of other qualified people. And so, there's just the reality that, sometimes you're just not going to hear back, or you're going to hear back late, or, there's other people that just are ahead of you in this line. And so, I want to just highlight that it's not always people's fault necessarily either. I mean, there's elements to this that are out of our control, when it comes to the hiring process. But it does lead me to ask the question to you, Bonnie. I want to kind of toss this your way, is what is some ATS etiquette that you think recruiting teams and recruiters specifically need to be doing a better job of? What are some things that we can do to make the experience better? Because I mean, we all know a lot of people in this field. We've worked with a lot of professionals in this field, and the truth is a lot of that criticism is warranted. Like there's a lot of really bad behavior. There's a lot of ghosting. There's a lot of just negative things that happen. So what can we be doing better to provide a better experience and maybe kind of mitigate against this a little bit?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, because like when you said, sometimes you're not going to hear back. And in my opinion, that is unacceptable. We have enough systems. And if a company hasn't invested in the systems that enable them to respond to people, then they need to fix their systems because there's enough out there. And so I think one of them is like getting our systems to a place and staffing our recruiting teams at a level that allow them to create a candidate experience that's going to be as positive as possible. I mean, no one wants to be rejected, but everyone deserves to have that answer. If they take the time to apply to your company, they deserve a response. And if you're having issues managing your volume, then you don't put a job on Indeed if you can't manage the Indeed volume, or, you take an application down once you hit a certain level until, number of apps until you're able to get through them. Like your teams are responsible for managing that and for having systems and processes in place to do that. And so that's like the first thing I would say is like, get your systems together so that it's less of an issue and easier to manage. I do think a lot of recruiting teams underestimate the importance of having like good tools. At a previous employer, we went through 3 ATSs in my 5 years there. And one of them was horrible. I mean, you had to click through an application at about 18 different places. Each one loaded a fresh screen. Never would have occurred to me to think about that. But once we got into it, it took over a minute to review a single application. In a system like Greenhouse, which we use with my current employer, we're able to review an application in, seconds. Like it's one load and you can see everything on one screen. That makes a huge difference for a team, and companies like need to be thoughtful about what they're asking their recruiters to work with and allocate like the right resources to their team. So I would definitely say that. And then I think having like clear expectations and commitments around the candidate experience that you want to create and publicly sharing them. My company has a commitment to applicants. It's in the, message that people get both when they apply for the job and when after application, that little auto response. So they know what to expect from us, and our team feels accountable to that. And so I think a lot of times if those things aren't defined, it's easy for teams to let that stuff slide. So yeah, I think that's some of it. And it takes resources and it takes like time and effort to do that. But I also think it pays off in terms of your employer brand and, having people that are beating down the doors to work at your company. And so I think it ultimately pays off.
Yeah. A lot of times recruiting teams are trying to change the culture with their hiring managers about interviewing, but a lot of times there's a lot of culture change and philosophy change that needs to happen even within the recruitment team, right? Or related to communication, kind of nipping these bad habits in the bud, so to speak.